Hi, this is Oren Conham from the YouTube channel Sophomore Critic, which you're watching, as well as the Patreon OK Journalist, as well as multiple countless publications that I've written for, or I might be your neighbor or a member of your immediate family. Today I'm going to be talking about Saturday Night Live. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about the top 10 rookie classes ever to grace the 51 years of the show. I'm doing this because the Saturday Night Network did this, and I want to impress them, and maybe they'll invite me, and I want to put out some hot takes. I want to also do this, I want to also lay out some ground rules, because the two commentators had different angles on doing it. So, like them, I'm going to eliminate the first year from contention, because they were all rookies that year. I'm going to base this more on the creativity in casting and the quality of the cast, regardless of whether Lorne Michaels made the right decisions in who to retain. He frequently makes bad decisions on who to keep at the 1 year mark, whether to renew rookies' contracts. And I'm also going to base it a little more on how good they did out of the gate. Will Forte and Fred Armisen, for example, are two people who showed their kind of weirdness a little bit later in their runs. But I'm going to try to balance that out a little bit. So, my number 10 class is going to be, drumroll, 2022. This would be Marcelo Hernandez, Michael Longfellow, Devin Walker, and Molly Carney. This was a class that sort of had a lot of shoes to fill, in the sense that like 6 or 7 cast members left the show right before this happened. For Devin Walker, for example, he, as the non-Keenan Black member on the cast, he filled the shoes of Chris Redd, who was one of my all-time favorites. So those are some pretty big shoes to fill. Lorne did not properly appreciate this class, except for Marcelo. I think he made some big mistakes here. I don't necessarily think that Devin being let go in his 3rd season was a mistake. I think he kind of showed all he could do, and he'd probably be better off in sitcom land. But I think that in his first year, he was actually pretty good. And his 3rd year, if he showed just a little more promise, like that Weekend Update bit where he was like imitating a certain YouTube influencer, and he showed a little bit more range in his impressions and his sketch work, you know, he could have been good, but I think at this point it was time to let it go. But that doesn't mean that he didn't do great in his first year. There's also Molly Carney. I'm going to make a controversial choice here to say that Molly Carney is a female casting decision. In casting, I'm going to respect her gender identity and say they read female and are biologically female. So they added, but it's a good thing because they added a certain wild card energy to the female cast. They had their best sketch, in my opinion, with the Aubrey Plaza sketch, in which Aubrey Plaza and Molly played nuns, and they showed a great accent work and great enthusiasm and range. For the most part, though, Molly Carney has a common persona of being like a male Chris Farley, kind of a drunk redneck type. They did pretty well with it. I'm not sure if they really were the future of the show that needed more than, 2 or 3 seasons, but they were a great addition. Michael Longfellow and Marcelo Hernandez, I think, were the two in the class that really should have been on, that deserved long runs. And Marcelo Hernandez, although he might be a little overplayed now, and the Domingo thing got played to death, he brings this sort of unique Latin American perspective. He sort of, and that's what comedians should do. They should mind their influences and, childhood experiences. Does he overplay the Latin card? I don't think so. I think sketches where he's talking Spanish or drawing from his experiences growing up in Miami have made great Weekend Update bits. I loved his bit with Anna Armas, where there are 2 Hispanic students outsmarting the teacher. His recent Sebastian Maniscalco impression was great. Michael Longfellow, I think it is one of Lorne's biggest mistakes. My theory is that he was hoping to get Colin and Michael to retire this past year, and they wouldn't do it, and so Michael had to wait a little longer in line, because his real ideal place is the Weekend Update desk, and then things got kind of messy, and then Michael left, or he let Michael go, who knows, and it's a real tragedy. I actually like Michael a lot. He had a very sardonic wit and a very unique voice that you could sort of take anywhere and you would get the same guy. The problem is that and also the thing about a stand-up is that basically you want them to kind of expand their comic persona into sketch territory, and that's exactly what Michael Longfellow did. He did, expand him. He played himself really well in sketches. So let's go back to 1998. That's going to be Jimmy Fallon, Horatio Sanz, Chris Kattan, and Rachel Dratch. The other podcast said that if you come in late during the season, then you're counted on the next year. I'm not going to play that game except for with a couple exceptions, such as Kate McKinnon and Jason Sudeikis, who came in with 4 episodes to go of the previous seasons. So this was a cast, they weren't necessarily needed because the 1995 and 1996 cast were building up pretty well, but they were all pretty solid, absolutely. Horatio Sanz, like him or not, he was there 8 seasons. That's longer than pretty much anyone, except for Tim Meadows at the time. Chris Parnell went from 98 to 2006, but I would count it as 7.5 seasons because he got fired and then rehired midway through the season. Beyond that, so Chris Parnell had a lot of great impressions. He was a good glue character. I think he showed that he was a very consummate improv guy who can kind of go with the flow in a lot of ways. Horatio Sanz was a little bit more of a guy who made his mark with personality, but he was also a very seasoned performer who can do a lot of things. Rachel Dratch obviously was definitely an oddball character, also a strong impressionist, and she's just kind of one of those personalities that there's no one like her. How she compares to the Amy, Maya, Tina triumvirate, well, I mean, you don't really have to ask that question because they were never really in competition. They just all complemented each other really well, and you could see it in the camaraderie they had in their subsequent movies and things like that. Then there's Jimmy Fallon. Now, Jimmy Fallon, I abhor him as a talk show host. This isn't my own quote, but the Washington Post TV critic once said that Jimmy Fallon is like an overeager elementary school student who's looking for Reese's Playmates on The Tonight Show. As someone who's practiced journalism and puts a lot of thought in what I would ask people if I were a talk show host, he doesn't ask very deep questions. He's the king of fluff, and it's horrible to watch. But that does not mean that watching him in 1998, I was thinking, he's great. I mean, and when I heard he had a talk show, I said, this sounds like a great move for him. When he was on Celebrity Jeopardy, he did great moves. He also did guitar bits on Weekend Update. He had original characters. I love that radio character that showed a certain dexterity as sort of a magic trick in all his voices. You can draw a line between Adam Sandler, Jimmy Fallon, Andy Samberg, Pete Davidson, and Marcelo Hernandez is like the hunky young guy. And of all those 5, I think Jimmy Fallon took the acting side of Saturday Night Live the most seriously. I'm going to erase my personality and jump into a character, which is really kind of interesting. So after that, we get 2010. This is the first year in which I knew cast members going into Saturday Night Live. Taran Killam from Mad TV, and because I'm from Virginia and Jay Pharoah is from Virginia, I actually saw Jay Pharoah before he was cast. So I was super excited about this cast, and this led to me getting more deep into the show week by week and just following it, and to see the fate of these guys that continues today. But I think it's also a very talented quartet. Again, one of the 4, Paul Burton, is a person who Lorne did not fully appreciate, although he gave him a lot of room to shine in his 1.5 seasons there. He let him do some really interesting original characters like Lord Windermere, and I can't remember who else. So I remember Entertainment Weekly actually had a centerfold about these guys. They were great. You also had Taron Killam, very sturdy guy who was up for anything. I remember like the third or fourth episode, he was just like going for it, kissing Elton John or something. Like, I am going to French kiss this guy as if my life depends on this. Jay Pharoah, I don't think he was necessarily wasted potential. I know his background. I know that he did Othello in high school. He was on a sketch troupe in VCU. He was more than a guy who could just do Will Smith and Denzel Washington. But number one, when you audition, you don't just do an impression. You do the guy like Denzel Washington getting stuff behind at an exchange store to a department store. So he was pretty malleable with his impressions, and then he eventually did Obama. He did more, but he was more than that. I think that towards the end of his 6-year run, he started to do significantly more impressions and more valuable stuff and more sketch work. And then Vanessa Bayer was absolutely, she was just a force of nature. I think that my favorite thing about Vanessa Bayer is that in certain sketches, like you watch that sketch where the Under the Sea parody, where Osama bin Laden is there, and Vanessa Bayer is smiling the whole way through it. She's not breaking, she's just smiling. She has a very positive energy to her sketches. She had, the Miley Cyrus show. She had the Bar Mitzvah Boy. She had some really big hits. But it's more than that. It's, I think, just, it's just being a solid source of the funny in a lot of the sketches she was in. She and Nasim Pedrad got overshadowed a little bit despite sizable runs because the 2012 class came to define the show in a certain way, but she was in the middle of it all, and they needed a good woman, a female cast member at that point in history where she stepped in. After that, 2012, we're going to go to 1985. Yes, this is a little controversial. I actually like this season. This is the season they made a whole documentary about how this is a mess in preparation for the 2025 50th anniversary, about how season 11 was one of the big failures. I wasn't there. I'm just watching it. I was just watching it in a vacuum. I would have been a toddler or something when it aired. I was just watching it on Peacock, and what I do know is that it was an incredibly daring experiment of putting together a lot of disparate voices. You had Joan Cusack, who was just this outlandish Gilda Radner kind of force of nature. Damon Wayne is a living legend. Terry Sweeney is this guy from the gay community who, gay or not, he was funny, good at impressions and blending into a scene. Randy Quaid is the only Oscar-nominated actor to have moved from Oscar nomination to Saturday Night Live. Then you had John Lovitz. I mean, everyone loves him, I guess. I thought he was okay, but, we'll add it as a plus. Nora Dunn was great. And I think Denitra Vance, I don't remember too much about her, but, I mean, she was there. And Robert Downey Jr. wasn't as bad as people say. So, I thought this was a great cast. And I think their work, I think the very act of casting such disparate voices was something that deserves praise within itself. I know that, Terry Sweeney in an interview said that, they kind of liked each other, but they just didn't have much to talk about, and they just kind of felt a little pushed together by outside forces and didn't have much time to gel. That's kind of tragic, because this is a show where you have to learn how to gel on the spot. It's a do or die, cutthroat atmosphere, and I'm kind of surprised that the cast just didn't say, we gotta gel and make this happen. I mean, I know they do chemistry line readings, but this isn't Kids in the Hall, this isn't Broad City, this isn't a group of comedians who have established chemistry and are like, we're gonna bring this to TV. This is people getting the chance of their lives to be on the nation's premier sketch comedy program and saying, I'm gonna integrate what I'm doing into what they're doing. I'm not sure why it didn't work out in terms of the perceived failure, but I thought it was a big success. My number 6 pick is The Year After. So basically, John Lovitz, Dennis Miller, and Nora Dunn combined with 5 other people, and they were Phil Hartman, Kevin Nealon, Victoria Jackson, Jan Hooks, and Dana Carvey. some people say, a lot of people are of the opinion, and maybe it's also colored by her politics. She was one of the first people to just be a little against the popular current in the Democratic communities of show business on many issues, and to be very vocal about it. But a lot of people found her very whiny and stuff. I think that she was pretty decent, but you got to admit that 4 of the new members, Kevin Nealon, Phil Hartman, Dana Carvey, and Jan Hooks, were really special talents. People might also say this because of a little bit of a nostalgia factor, because Philip Hartman and Jan Hooks tragically passed away, and Jan Hooks kind of receded from show business and didn't want to mythologize herself in later years. But but I do think it's not too much difference between 86 and 85, because 85 laid the groundwork for 86. I mean, The Sweeney Sisters is a popular sketch that was Nora Dunn and Jan Hooks bouncing off each other. Fun fact, they hated each other behind the scenes. I as far as I know, I wish it wasn't the case, but it was. But I mean, I think, it was a cast that was. But I think it's 2 for the count. I also think that actually, I don't know what I think. I don't know what I'm saying. Let's go back to my next pick, which I'm gonna say is 2012. This is a mix between 3 women who lasted a long time and did a great job on the show, and 1 guy who did not do great on the show, but he managed to make it through the writing room, where he wrote a lot of really interesting sketches and became a cult figure outside of the parameters of the show. So in this case, you have Tim Robinson, who's that cult figure, and you have Kate McKinnon, Aidy Bryant, and Cecily Strong. Obviously, Cecily Strong is an amazing and flexible actress. I love that she's, let's be honest, I'm a straight guy, she's a good-looking woman, but she kind of knows how to play unattractive, she knows how to play attractive. She also knows to immerse. She's very character-based. I love some of the little sketches, like the Sacagawea sketch with Kyle Mooney and Beck Bennett. I love the sketch where she's a basketball player, and the one where Leslie Jones and Martin Freeman get married against the will of God. I think what's also interesting about Cecily Strong is I think she has the best voice, the best vocal talent of anyone who's ever been on the show. When you think about those New York musical sketches with John Mulaney, Cecily Strong usually has the best musical lines of him. She's a theater kid, so I know that. I love seeing Kate and Cecily team up. It didn't happen too often. Kate McKinnon, obviously a trailblazer too much. Sometimes she leaned into weird territory, but she might have had the best Hillary Clinton of all. She was obviously flexible. She transitioned, Cecily and Kate, actually both of them transitioned into movies and TV pretty well, as did Aidy Bryant. Aidy Bryant is also kind of inspirational because she is the first kind of plus-size woman in the history of the show. And I can imagine many plus-size viewers at home, maybe young viewers, being like, well, I guess I can achieve my dreams, and I could be on Saturday Night Live. I can't imagine the effect she had. And I remember, and she had a certain boldness and sassiness in her way of doing things. She was a great person for reactions. I remember when she is in that sketch, the Gidget parody, where Taran Killam is courting Charlize Theron, and all these people are, doing this pathetic dancing on the beach, and she's mostly reacting. Even when they say she's losing her summer in the Girlfriends talk show, Aidy Bryant is just like, I'm losing my best girlfriend, Cecily Strong, and it's a lot of reaction shots. She's that kind of person, and I especially love her sketch with Chris Pratt. This would have been the season premiere of her 3rd season, where there are two nervous guys meeting in a singles bar, and then they immediately do rap lines to each other, and that shows her boastful nature. And she also does a great Cardi B impression. So Aidy Bryant, so those 3. Then after that, we have, I think it's going to be a tie. I'm sorry, I'm going to do a tie. One is the 1995 season. the first season I watched of Saturday Night Live was around 97, 98. So this was pretty formative for me. The three cast members that I thought were pretty groundbreaking were Molly, Anna, and Sherry on the female side. And they didn't enter in the same season. So at this point, it's just Molly and Nancy Walls, who didn't make too much of an impact. There was a murderer's row, or just a lot. There were oodles and oodles of new male cast members at this point in time. Will Ferrell, Chris Kattan, Daryl Hammond, Colin Quinn, Jim Brewer, and David Koechner. I'm not sure if I missed anyone. But again, humongous influx of talent with a lot of different backgrounds. Will, Sherry, and Chris all knew each other at the Groundlings, and they were extremely ready to go with characters. Some of the ones from their auditions made it into the show pretty instantly. Then you had Colin Quinn, who was a stand-up, and I think he actually transitioned to acting pretty well before he did what I consider to be a good job at the desk. I remember his Matthew Perry impression as a gay Liberace type in the middle of a Matthew Perry sketch. I actually thought it was really hilarious. He also did a good Robert De Niro. Daryl Hammond obviously took his place as an impressionist. David Koechner, I mean, his talent in later projects speaks for himself. Let's just put it that way. After David Koechner, the other one I'm tying with is 2006. 2005, 2006. I personally think Bill Hader, he's a little overly mythologized. He's a great character actor. A lot of people think, he's not as... I don't know, maybe he's a little bit humble about how good he is, and maybe people love him for that. But yeah, of course, he was there for, that would be 8 seasons, and did not waste a single season. You also have Andy Samberg, who sort of brought the show into the internet age, absolutely. Kristen Wiig was this mousy girl who came in at the end of an era where there were already 4 women on cast who were already stars. This was the point where Rachel Dratch, Tina Fey, Maya Rudolph, and Amy Poehler were all ready to move on to the next phase. And even it seemed almost overkill that Amy and Maya would stay any longer, because they could have Amy Poehler was already in Mean Girls and Anchorman, and Maya Rudolph was in 50 First Dates and Prairie Home Companion. By the time this all happened, Rachel Dratch had already been in a few movies. And Kristen Wiig found a way to carve a niche in there, and you really rooted for her, because it was like, well, she's really swimming with the sharks right now. And so in that first season, I thought she actually did pretty okay, and then she carried the load heavily, so much that people on the message boards, because I was on the message boards in those days, kind of resented her for swallowing too much oxygen in the room. Lastly, you have Jason Sudeikis, who was a very sturdy, reliable guy who created a lot of characters of his own. It helped that Jason Sudeikis was a writer, so he had some really good sink or swim practice forming his own sketches before he got on the show. It's also really interesting that he asked Lauren, he auditioned twice, and he asked Lauren 3 times to put him in the cast, and the third time he played his cards just right, and he got in 4 episodes before the 2005 season. So the second number 2, I'm going to say the 1984 season. It's not a historic trend that continued on, because the show would later find it did not have the budget to just put the biggest stars they could find, and the work schedule no longer was appealing to people who had any clout and would do other things in the industry. But you had Billy Crystal, you had Martin Short, one of my all-time favorite comedians, and kind of everyone's all-time favorite comedian. You had Harry Shearer, you had Christopher Guest, and you had Pamela Stevenson, who I don't know much about, honestly, as the new class. I'm not sure if I missed anyone, but I think that's it. Harry Shearer, coincidentally, was on the 79 to 80 class as the only new main cast member, and he hated it. So somehow they got him to go again. I think he's a little bit improved in this particular year. but I think he also hated that year as well. But, and Billy Crystal, I think in this point was certainly fresher. Now he's known for a certain outdated Borscht Belt style of comedy. But yeah, I mean, for the sheer kind of talent that you had in one year, it's that one. My number one class is the 1990 class. This is an era from like 1990 to 1995 that I grew up kind of watching because Comedy Central was on a lot. Even like in high school, when a substitute was in there, like, let's just watch TV, we would do Comedy Central and watch Saturday Night Live reruns all the time. This was Adam Sandler, David Spade, Rob Schneider, Chris Farley, Chris Rock, Tim Meadows, and Julius Sweeney. Pretty much all of those guys stayed on for quite a while, and all of those guys were successful in one form or another. Even Julius Sweeney, who kind of faded in the background, got a movie and was in some great sketches in an era in which she played second fiddle to all the guys. I know you're thinking Rob Schneider is a crazy fringe political lunatic who has been in some horrible movies. I recently rewatched the 1991-1992 season in preparation to interview Shyaban Fallon, who was in that the cast the year after this one. And Rob Schneider's actually a pretty good sketch actor. I was as surprised as you were. Whatever he did afterwards, I don't know why, but he was actually pretty good in this. On top of that, you had David Spade. I love David Spade. He was kind of a role model to me in high school because he's not the guy who's gonna get the best grades. He's not the guy who's gonna make the sports teams. He's not gonna get the best girls. He might even get beaten up for his lunch money, but at least he's gonna get that jab, that verbal jab. He's always gonna be counted on to say something smart and sassy as you take him down. You also had Chris Rock, again, a completely different flavor, more from like the Def Comedy Jam school. Completely different flavor. Tim Meadows was a longtime cast member who fit in seamlessly. He figured that he would be a great character actor, and he did. And, Chris Farley, obviously, people think of him as this kind of fat slob. They idolize him too, but justifiably so. He was an extremely... his kindness and generosity as an actor shone through very well, and he was very inventive in physical and as well as acting. And Adam Sandler was his own thing, of course, and is very successful. I think I got them all. And what's also great about the 1990s class is they didn't displace the people that came before them. In the interviews I've seen, that they were all very reverential of Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman, Kevin Nealon, Mike Myers, and waiting their turn. And so, I mean, those first couple of years, those first 2 or 3 years was a very great era of the show. One thing I guess I want to say is, if you wanted to say my least favorite season, it would be 2004-2005. And that's Fred Armisen and Will Forte. No, I don't even just see that. I'll just cut this part out. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. I've been on a bus this whole time, so I just figured I gotta crank this out. If you hear bus noises in the background, just like that, just call it part of the ambient noise. But the point was my words and what I said, and hopefully I held the camera at a place that I don't look like an eyesore. I have no idea.